Does it work? Oh, yes, it works. Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this session and for being so many in this room. We are really happy to share with you the insights of a study that we conducted in the last 18 months, more or less, I guess, right now. And that I hope you will find interesting. The reason why we decided to do this study, and in a few seconds I will share with you who ran it and who will be participating to this panel, is that I think that I see a lot of business leaders in this room, and we all know that business can sometimes be part of the problem, but very often can also be part of the solution. And what we find interesting is that if you look at the media those days, almost every day you could find some CEO or global leader who basically do a lot of public statements and public commitments when it comes to sustainability and sustainable transformation. The thing is that when you look back, 6 months later, nothing really happens. And what we really wanted to understand is why people who are truly and authentically committed don't really manage to accelerate the transformation of their business and more broadly of the economy. And we realized that basically between what we can say on the stage and the difficulty and the complexity of transforming businesses, there is a huge world. And that we really wanted to deep dive and to really understand the intrinsic barriers that really prevent CEOs and leaders from really walking the talk. So we decided to partner with Adelaide and Chris, who is online from Australia, so it's the middle of the night for him, to really go in depth and really interview 40 CEOs from very, very large companies in Europe and globally, and to really try to really incept this in-depth conversation and to be able to really understand what was holding them back, or what was frustrating them, or what they were expecting in order to really accelerate the transformation of their business. And what we'll be showing today is a bit of the results of this study, the main, let's say, behaviors that we have been witnessing, and also to discuss those learnings with two people that are on stage with me. One is virtually, actually Sébastien is online. I don't know if we can see him, but he's joining us from France, from Brittany. He couldn't make the trip, but he really wanted to be part of this discussion. We are also super lucky to have an amazing social entrepreneur with Arnaud, who is really into helping leaders transform and deeply transform individually, I would say, before leading the corporate transformation that they have to accomplish. And last but not least, and we'll start with you, Adelaide. Adelaide is one of the two anthropologists who really ran this study and really created this space for in-depth conversation. So that's what we will be going through today in 1 hour. So it will go fast. I see Sébastien on the screen. Hi, Sébastien. Thanks for being with us. And with that, so let me just, sit with my fellow panelists, and please give them a round of applause just to motivate them. So Adelaide, thanks for joining, and really, I know that this study was important for you. I know that you learned a lot from that. I would be very interested in getting your first insights. After those many hours of discussions with CEOs and leaders, what do you take away from those conversations?
Yeah, is this on? Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to be sharing the key insights from this study. It's 40 pages long, so there's a lot in there. Please feel free to get into the detail and ask us any questions. I think maybe just the first thing is to share a little bit about who we interviewed, why we interviewed them. So it's 40 interviews, in depth, remote and in person. We had 28 business leaders, CEOs and CFOs, France, Germany, and the UK. And you can see on the screen some of the companies that we spoke to. We had Vinci, Nexity, Rémy Cointreau in France, Synlab, Metzler Bank in Germany, Collinson Group, Lockheed Martin in the UK. So we're focusing on companies that were over 500 million plus turnover and over 1,000 employees. we didn't want to be comparing apples and pears. We really wanted to look at these large businesses. And then in terms of, we had some experts as well who, had that experience of, working with all these CEOs. They had some insights as well from, they could talk to us about the differences between industries, differences between markets. So we really wanted to get something that was relatively representative. Some of the key insights, I think for me, we talk about in all of our projects really, we're anthropologists, we study human behavior, and in every single project, there is an action intention gap, right? So we have all these great intentions, and then in terms of actual behavior, in terms of actually going there, it doesn't happen. So it was the same for these business leaders. What we found was actually there was a lot of intention towards going towards sustainable business transformation. So that's like, changing their core business and actually, reinventing their business models. But in terms of actually getting there, in terms of action and behavior, that wasn't happening. And there are lots of drivers and barriers that we explore in the report. We look at regulation, we look at competition, we look at a whole range of things, but there's kind of two key things for me. I think the first one is this kind of, it's really fascinating. We thought that consumers were going to be the ones driving the change. So we thought, actually, it's going to be consumers that are going to really be changing the behavior, and CEOs and companies are going to adapt. And actually, CEOs were saying to us, there hasn't been a huge paradigm shift. Actually, in the end, people are still doing what they used to do 10, 15 years ago. There's a tiny little minority which is speaking very loud, but actually, things aren't really changing. And what was changing in the way that consumers are having an impact is where they're choosing to work. So in the end, it's actually to attract talent for that retention, that actually, if you kind of, I'll show you these on the next slide, that was what was really changing people's behaviors, the business's behaviors. It was, trying to attract people. And it makes sense because, when you're there in the shop, when you're buying something, it's a split decision. You don't really care. But when you're choosing where you're going to work, that's your identity. That's what you tell, who you are to the world. So obviously, that's where people were making changes. And I think the second one is up here on the screen. It was the huge difference between the complexity that some of these CEOs were kind of facing. So we call them wicked problems in design. So they're incredibly complex, systemic problems. No one optimal solution. You try to start solving it, and you've created another one. Things like stranded assets, managing changing regulation, trying to achieve cultural change within a business. All of that complexity that they're facing, and then the simplicity with which the media and the citizen sector was talking about some of these issues. It was, and you can see these on screen, the bad guys, they're refusing to do it, they're evil, and then on the other side of the spectrum, the good guys, the startups, they're ahead of the curve, they've got it figured out. And when we started having conversations with these CEOs, actually, they got very kind of worried, and we could sense that this was quite a touchy topic because they're getting a lot of attention, they're getting a lot of scrutiny. And really, it's this huge clash between the simplicity with which people talk about this, and it's a moral lens. So we're saying you're doing good, it's ethical, whereas what they're facing are complex business problems. So that's creating what we call hypocrisy avoidance. So the fear of appearing hypocritical. It's causing a status quo bias. So we don't want to take a risk. We just do what we've always been doing. And actually, there are a lot of companies that were doing a lot of great stuff, but not communicating it because they were scared of doing the wrong thing, of being said to be hypocritical. And a lot of fear around that. So that's really, I think, one of the two key things that really came out for us.
Yeah, I think this notion of wicked problem was really interesting because, as you were saying, they can be really genuine in their willingness to change something, and then they realize that just by moving slightly a parameter, then it has an impact on a number of other factors and things that they cannot really control. And at the end of the day, just they back off and wait. And sometimes they wait to be forced actually to change. It was quite interesting to see the number of CEOs who are basically expecting regulations, for instance, to really push them to do something instead of, I would say, anticipate and really take the lead. So based on those, let's say, findings and what you understood from that was really holding those CEOs behind, what have you learned in terms of the way certain CEOs really tackle, those aspects and manage to move the needle? What are the strategies that they use?
So before answering that, I wanted to talk to something because it really depends on what kind of CEO you're talking about.
Sure, the different.
And I think what we tried to do is just to create different mindsets and think about, what are some of the different challenges that different CEOs might be facing, and what are, some of their different strategies. So we started mapping, and we created all these indicators for how much the business was going towards, core business restructuring, changing their business model. And we mapped CEOs and businesses on an axis. And if you hit the next slide, you'll see it. From kind of minimal changes to operations, maybe they're doing some CSR things. It's very peripheral. Towards significant change toward operations and business model, and depending again on the mindset, the type of CEO, you've got different strategies. So on the number 6 here on the far right, you have these business purists. There aren't that many of them, but they see business as inherently having a positive impact. So I'm hiring people, I'm having a positive impact on the world. I'm paying my taxes, I'm having a positive impact on the world. Then you have, and these two in the middle that are darker, they're the ones that we saw the most of. So the sporadic initiator was the CEO who was having, very peripheral, more scattered CSR initiatives. They feel like they're doing a pretty good job, but it's still very small. And then a very common one was this number 4, which we called the striving navigator. They're pretty confident leading a business and making profit, but they're not sure how to deal with all this new CSR stuff. So they want to have more impact. They're quite critical when you really start having these honest conversations with them, but they're struggling to navigate all these wicked problems. And then towards the right end of the scale, so there's the advantage seekers. Those are the CEOs who are really seeing it as a competitive advantage. It's a way to stand out compared to their competition. And then the 1 and 2, it's more kind of intrinsic. So they've got, the legacy builder is someone who's, they've reached a tipping point in their career. They've got to a certain moment where actually they want to give back. They want to do things differently. And the long-term advocate were the CEOs who, they've been doing this for a really long time. They've always had these strong pro-social values. So depending on these kind of different CEOs, you've got different strategies. I think what we really saw from the ones who were doing it successfully, they were talking about this balancing act between, getting my business stable and making sure that, everything is rolling well, and then, moving very quickly towards, significant change towards their business model for positive impact. And they talked about, in French, they said, il faut passer son bac. You've got to get your certificate first, and then you can go and do this stuff. I had a CEO who said, it's like a bike. You've got to do a bit to the left, a bit to the right, and stay stable. And some of the things that we heard, and it'll be great to hear from Arnoun and Sébastien about some of the things that they've done and seen. There's a lot of, setting achievable targets, focusing on one specific thing, not trying to do everything in terms of social and environmental impact. Setting achievable targets and a roadmap. You can't say we're going there, but not say how. There was also a lot of innovation, trying to do things differently, accepting failure. Partnerships, these are complex problems. They require collective problem solving. Another thing that we saw a lot of was, and this is also something we're going to talk about here today, is, you can't just snap your fingers and expect change to happen all of a sudden. And the ones who were doing this successfully were gradually engaging people internally to change the culture. For some of them, it's 50,000 people in your company. Try to get them to do things completely differently. I remember a CEO, we asked him, who's the CEO of tomorrow? What kind of skills does he have? And he said, The CEO of tomorrow is a conductor. He's not the best violinist. He's not the best pianist. He's a conductor. You know, you got to move out of the way and let people kind of build this from the ground up. And I think the last one, and we talked about this when we had the findings of the study, was a lot of the time we're talking about this topic with moral lens, with ethical frames. We're saying good, bad, and actually it's a business problem. And these guys are quite excited to solve this business problem. It's exciting, it's new territory. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity around reframing the debate around, you know, business, complex problem solving rather than moral, ethical, you know, judgment.
Yeah, thank you. What strikes me is really the fact that what you described at basically the abilities for people to take risks, to innovate, to be more maybe horizontal and partnering with others is really what we see with social entrepreneurs who try to really to have this systemic approach. They are not always successful, but at least we can see a bit of those skills and characteristics that we are really looking after at Ashoka when we elect our fellows. And we can talk about that in a few minutes with Arnaud. But before we do that, since we have Sébastien online, and thank you again for this, we'll really open the floor to the audience in a few minutes. I'm sure you will have tons of questions. Let's really move on. Sébastien, thanks for being with us from France and from Brittany more in particular. We would love to have you react, because we discussed that a lot already, you know, what it takes for CEOs to really lead change and to be consistent, to be authentic, and to be able to really create this culture of change making. I know that this is an important topic for you. So maybe a couple of words on Kersia and how fast growing you are at the moment and why this change making culture is so important for you.
Good afternoon to all of you. Sorry not to be with you. I hope that you are listening and hearing well. The first reaction to Adelaide's words. Adelaide, you did assess my professional life recently, or it's amazing how it's describing my daily professional life. To be honest, I had a question for you, and that's not for now, but for further discussion. The question mark, thanks to your words, is how to accelerate the empowerment of people, because that's what we are facing now in the organization. But to answer to your question, Arnaud, so Kersia is an international company headquartered in Brittany in France. We do propose to the food chain some solution as a detergent, disinfectant to prevent the contamination of the food chain by pathogens. So that's true for farmers, for food manufacturers, for kitchen and catering, and also the water purification for drinkable water for human, but also for animals. So in that particular environment, as a lot of companies, we do face an unprecedented crisis, and we need to change and to adapt ourselves. And we are lucky because 3 years ago, we did decide, I would say, an ambitious CSR program. And we also did decide to move further on that topic of change. And so my objective is really to make the company able to absorb the crisis to come and coming and seize opportunities. And we bet on the fact that if individuals are resilient, collectively, we will be resilient. That's the first bet. And the second one is to adopt, and you've mentioned it, Arnaud, the entrepreneurial solution-driven mindset, because you cannot solve such crisis if you look at it globally. So you need people empowered locally, taking into consideration what they do face and solving the issue, day after day and step by step. So that's what we are trying to install across the company.
Thank you, Sébastien. And I know that this is a dear topic to your heart, I would say, at the personal level. Can you just share with us why, as a CEO, you decided that it was important? What was your personal I would say, drive for this?
Because as you've mentioned it, and to explain, the company grew from 80 million euro top line revenue in 2016, and today in 22 we will be reaching around 450 million euro, and we went from 400 people to 2,200 people end of this year. So you can imagine that, of course, we need to have, I would say, advisors around us, and we do have some. For example, we've got, our consulting firm for operations. We do have a leadership talent management program with academics. But as we have gathered a lot of former family-owned company, because we did 12 acquisitions during the last 5 years, you do have deeply a cultural topic that we have to manage. And we did decide, thanks to our the discussion with you, Arnaud, with Ashoka, thanks to some board member that we have in our board, and one of them is with you in the meeting room today. We did decide to work on that cultural transformation through that committed and different program that you have on the slide behind me, to adopt this change maker company mindset. So the goal of that program, Committed and Different, is really to help the people to move from the theory to practice, and to create, a tangible spaces to experiment new ways of thinking, working. Well, that's easy to say. Of course, it's difficult to do. But what I'm proud of is that we did start with the first cohort with 14 people. The second one, we did also 14 people. And this year, we will be welcoming around 40 people to that third cohort. So year after year, we feel that we are creating a culture where there is a room for the risk-taking and failures, which is not obvious, because when you come from a family-owned company, the family owners is driven the business, is driven the people, is driven everything. So when you ask those people to change themselves and to adapt themselves and to say, okay, look, that's your turn now, and you have to decide. And the people, they look at you and they say, okay, look, you are very sympathetic, you are clever, you are a good French friend, but I don't know how to do. So to develop the more horizontal governance and develop this individual agency and leadership, that's thanks to that committed and different program based on the Ashoka culture and program that we are building that on.
Thank you. Before we go to the next question, I would love to, Arnaud, maybe to react to what you just heard, because I know that you are being approached very often for people, who come and say, okay, my sales are dropping, I have this particular issue, etc. But every time it comes down to people. So how does that resonate, what you just heard, both from Adelaide and the learnings, but also what Sébastien just said?
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I think if you want to create change, people have to be empowered. So the full organization have to be empowered. And I think we're facing a kind of a self-awareness crisis. We overestimate ourselves in the level of self-awareness that we have. Actually, there is some data as well that shows us that if you speak about self-awareness, you can divide the world in the ones that think they're self-aware and the ones that are self-aware. And actually, the one that thinks they're self-aware, that's about 90%. And the one that are self-aware, that's only 10%. So that's a bit of the front row over here in this audience, let's face it. So I think there is still way too much hero leadership, wearing masks, the old paradigm, actually. And we really need to tackle that empowerment question and that self-awareness question in organizations. And I think the critical mass in the cultural change we have, what we face with our customers, is definitely you're at mid-level leadership. Those guys are the ones that need to be the purpose-driven actually leaders and navigators of the company. But there is a complete lack of employee organizational fit in most cases, because employees, they just adapt. And yeah, I think, and certainly in leadership, there is a paradox as well in the self-awareness, because the higher you climb up in leadership, the more moderated the feedback you get will be. People speak with much more politics towards you because you're in a power position. So that makes it much more difficult for you to stay self-aware. And I'm in social entrepreneurship myself for 20 years already. We have a damn purpose-driven enterprise, actually. But for me personally, it's hard work every day again to stay in my core, I think. So I completely link to the comments. I recognize a bunch of stuff as well, being on sales, talking with CEOs that actually do beautiful stuff in becoming more sustainable, but are afraid to talk about it, communicate about it, because somebody will hunt them down, because they're not perfect yet. And we're in that paradox again that I think this is an evolution we're dealing with, but there is so much time pressure that it kind of looks as a revolution that we need. And of course, if you're in the old model with your company and you want to move into a more regenerative, sustainable company, there are steps in between. And the problem is that when you take the first steps, certainly somebody will smash you and call you a window dresser. That's the problem that we polarize in that discussion as well. And of course, we can't applaud window dressing, but maybe it's a first step. It's a first step to persuade people in the next step. So it's about creating a kind of a positive but skeptical voice as well in cooperating with these organizations, I think.
True, and just to come back, Sebastian, to committed and different, can you just share maybe with us, how working with social entrepreneurs like Arnaud and others really help develop this new mindset within Quercia?
What Arnaud is saying is really resonating to me because, while we do train our people with academic programs for leadership, management, and skills, the people struggle again to move from theory to practice. And what I like, even I love entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs mindset is really the fact that they are never blindsided by issues. They are changing, they are alliancing in their ecosystem, and they are really anticipating the change, and never they stay in the same position and saying, look, that's not my role and that's not my responsibility. And that's really what we want to install and build inside the company. And Arnaud is perfectly right. The main issue we have is really in the middle of the management, because the people, they are, far away the headquarters, they are sometimes alone with the small teams, and they consider that they do not have the means, etc., etc. And when you look at the scale of a social entrepreneur, in fact, they are smaller than we are. They do have less means than we have. But versus what we face in those situations, they are better because they really move further, and they've got inside their alliances and at ecosystem level, they are finding the solution to move further. And that's what we want to build inside the Quercia organization.
Thank you. And I know that, sometimes you say that you're tired of people just coming and asking for permission. And you want them to take action and maybe ask for forgiveness afterwards. So it's a new way of looking at this. But what do you think is necessary in terms of, let's say, the critical mass of people that you need to bring as change makers before it changes, let's say, the behaviors of everyone in the company?
What we are trying to do, I would say, a positive wedding. On the side, we've got an objective to train 10 to 15% of the total employees we have in the group, because we know, and that's historical data, that when you are reaching 15% or in between 10 and 15, you can consider that you will be moving further because you have distilled inside the organization the new mindset and the new skills, in fact. But additionally, what we have done last year to accelerate and to empower people is to open the capital of the company. And so today we've got 42% of employees, but from C-level to operators, that are owners, partially, of course, of the group. And it means that we are trying to marry the skills with the training and the committed and different program, and the empowerment and accountability that we are, all of us, because we are all, or the majority, shareholders of the group. And that's what we are trying to conduct. It's starting to change. we see, and the feeling is quite good, that people, they start to to innovate. For example, thanks to the sandbox we have built with the Ashoka team inside Cursia, we start to receive some innovative mindset and ideas. And for example, we had some proposal to install, a solar panel in some factory to produce electricity. And they did decide by their own to do so, but we've got also an idea to collect the water of the roof, to treat the water and to reuse that water instead of pump in the tap water of the collective system. So that's for the moment, that's small ideas. That's not costly, to be honest, but it's really helping the company to change and to adapt themselves.
Thank you, Sebastian. I have a question which was not anticipated. Apologies for that, but I'm sure you will be able to answer. So you're in a LBO scheme, right? So you have a major investor on your side, and I know that your investor was quite impressed with two things. I think this is important because we also need to bring along those investors as we develop this culture of change making within organizations. Would you mind sharing a bit the two aspects that they like at Kersia and that they value particularly?
In fact, you're right. 2 years ago, December 20, we have changed our majority shareholders from a private equity firm to another one. The first one was Ardian, and now we've got IK Partner. It's a Scandinavian Nordics private equity originally. And when they did assess, they've done that due diligence process that all of you know, and they did assess particularly two key levers in the Cursia group. The first one was the PMI, the post-merger integration process that we have developed by ourselves to integrate properly the people and to share culture and to avoid your, I would say, cultural misfit. So that's what the first. And the second one, you're perfectly right, Arnaud, it was the committed and different program among the CSR, I would say, program that we did start a few years ago. So those two levers, this is I would say, the better cocktail that we have done to integrate people, because you can imagine when you move from 400 people to 2,200 people, if you don't have some solid guidance and skill training platform to help them to change, you fail. And I think that today we still have that success and people are staying inside the group and the level of retention is quite good. And I think that this is because we are benevolent with them, we are taking care of them, and we really want to share value with them that we are creating together. That's what we are doing and the aim that I have personally.
Thank you. So that means that investors increasingly see the value of those programs and not just look at them as, useless expenses, but really something that can really create this common ground and this common culture within the organization. Thank you so much, Sebastian. We'll get back to you in a few minutes, I'm sure, but I would love to transition to you, Arnaud, because at Changemaker Companies at Ashoka, what we do is really to incept this new culture of change making, because again, strategies and process are important in order to accelerate transformation, but people are the true drivers. So how do we make sure that everyone in a company feels empowered to create change, to lead change, and to face the different barriers that we saw that are really numerous? So it's really important that people really master those skills and are really able to move the needle, step by step in their respective organizations. And I know that this is what you do on a daily basis. So maybe you could just reintroduce Streetwise, because I'm sure that even though you're a rock star, everyone knows you. There might be a couple of people who don't know exactly the story of Streetwise. And then I would love to really, help us really understand how you leverage, the skills that you have seen in Street Kids in order to equip leaders and people in corporations.
Yeah, thank you. I know. Presenting our organization, it's mobileschool.org is the name of the organization. It's actually a hybrid social enterprise. So we have two brands. We have Street Smart and Streetwise. With Street Smart, this is where it all started, building mobile schools to go and empower street-connected children and youth in the street. 150 million kids that are approached as a problem in society because they are needy kids in poverty on the streets, helping to shift the paradigm to an opportunity focus, not talking about 150 million needy kids in the streets, but starting to talk about 150 million untapped talents, you know, small human creatures with potential. We just waste as society. So taking that opportunity focus, and we designed mobile schools to bring them into the streets, to bring non-formal education to the streets, actually with the focus on empowering those kids, telling them that we see a role for them in society and convince them of their own potential. That's what we do with mobile school. After a few years of doing that, based on philanthropy, I got into a very inconsistent thing in our model, because we were reaching out to the streets to tell these kids, you know, like, you should develop yourself. It's a model of sustainable development. It's not about giving them fish, it's about getting them to pick up responsibility and create change in their own lives. But our model to reach those kids was completely financed by asking for fish. We were just asking for philanthropy and donations, using it to build an organization, build mobile schools, bring them to kids in poverty. And when they told us, like, give me some food or money, we told them, like, no, we don't believe in begging. You know, we bring education. And I think if you want to change the world, you need innovative new ideas. You need to have a vision, but you need to be what you preach as well. So we started Vision. So we created Streetwise, which is the business venture, so Street Smart, Streetwise. At first, we started learning from them because we saw problems on the street, but we got amazed as well with mainly a bunch of kids that were outperforming. A guy that learned 12 languages by handing out leaflets of pizzerias to tourists in Guatemala, picked up 12 languages. I made a film with the guys that telling me the story of his life in Flemish, in Dutch. He switches with me to French. He speaks Hebrew, Japanese. Never had been to school. The question we asked us is, those guys, how the hell are they capable to flourish in that world that constantly works against them? And we found a bunch of attitudes and skills that were clearly present within those kids. So we kind of harvested those skills and attitudes and created a street skills model, actually developed training, made films with the kids, and actually started approaching companies to help those companies to build that street savviness in their organizations. Now we brought it to the next level, actually, to rethink leadership, to rethink the why of your organization, talking about purpose. I think often you see a lot of companies now moving into more sustainability, but if you're on the leadership table, they use words as sustainability, CSR, purpose, mission, and they just fill the language in differently, so they just do not connect. So when we start working with customers, often we start with a masterclass on what is purpose, and let's define together what we mean if we use that word, because otherwise it's not working. So helping them to define this, but then as well helping them to create the right culture, because having a well-defined purpose in your organization is not doing the trick. Look at schools. It's clear that people in schools, you know, it's clear what should be the purpose of those people now, being educators in schools, but that doesn't mean that if you walk into a school that it's all a sparkling context and an environment. So you need to build the right organizational culture. And this is where we actually focus on helping people to commit and developing a bunch of skills and attitudes to help people to commit to a story and tell their personal story. It's about relating. It's about building teams, you know, and relate to each other. And actually, as well, get into more collaborative thinking and collaborative leadership, and pass your own brand and your own position and really start collaborating. It's about impact, it's about performance, and it's about leadership. So this is how we enter the companies, actually, from a training kind of positioning, developing the right attitudes and skills, and building the right stories. If I may, one more thing. When we work with leadership teams, linking it back to self-awareness, we always tell people, if you want to create movement in the organization, if you want to engage the people, people need to understand here why they would be part of your movement, but they need to feel it in the belly as well. They need to understand it, but they need to feel it as well. And the understanding that strategy, you know, that's the management story. That's controlling what you're doing and measuring what you're doing. But the belly is purpose. The belly is relations. The values is values. But if I work with leadership teams and I tell the leadership, take a piece of paper and take 5 minutes and write down the leadership legacy you want to leave in your company, the story you want to write with the power position you claim in your organization, they always negotiate on time. On the 5 minutes, because they just start thinking about this when you ask them the question. And I think if we want to transform, the big thing is going to our core and think about why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And when you claim a leadership position in a company, what are you going to do with this? What's the impact you're going to bring? This is where you will find the energy to become brave, to outstand, to collaborate with your competitors, because the change will be a market-related thing. When you're the only company in a certain market moving, you probably will be out of competition. So it's about finding those cooperations, but it starts with your leadership story, I think. And many of us claim that we know, but believe me, we don't.
Yeah, and this is what you were saying before as well, in terms of many leaders wearing masks, you know, and trying just to cope with the culture or what they think, you know, is expected from them. It's hard, and it was interesting to hear Sebastian saying that it's also a personal matter. You know, you need to be able to lead by example and to be the first recognizing your own failures, your own limits. And I think that this is something that is sometimes difficult for CEOs who are supposedly heroes and should be able to solve every single problem. Just to come back on the self-awareness aspect, because I see a strange tool just behind you. So I know that you wanted to talk about this aspect and you just started talking about your gut in your belly, but I don't know if you want to use it to exemplify a bit more what you wanted to say.
It was brought all over from France, huh? The thing we had like a
thank you, Maëlys, for bringing this up.
Yeah, I used the metaphor of a boxing sack, and Maëlys told me like, I'm gonna bring one. You can show it on stage. Let's do this. You know, like when in the keynote speeches, you know, and talking about self-awareness, I always use this metaphor. Like if you go and buy one of those guys in a sports shop and you forget to put water in the bottom, and you're gonna hit the thing. It's going to be an uncontrolled object. It flies everywhere. But when there is weight in the bottom, and we can prove it, if you hit it, it kicks back. You know, and this is about being grounded. This is about the roots. This is about, you know, who you are and why you're doing what you're doing and what are your main values. This is about self-awareness, I think. And we can project it to you individually in your own leadership, but you can project this on a team level as well. Who is the team you're leading? You know, what's the story? What are the relationships? It's on the organizational level as well. But you know, as well as me, that when you enter those companies, often that mission statement and the values are roll-up banners they push up when they have an event, but when you walk into the offices or factories, you don't feel it. And we have to walk the talk, be what we preach, and be much more strict to ourselves in doing so.
Yeah. So don't do it with your colleagues, obviously. Even if they are grounded, they might fight back. This is what you also heard. Before we move to the audience and then we take some questions, Sebastian also spoke about the fact that very often, you know, even if you have a top-down and great leadership, if you allow bottom-up approaches to happen, there is still a bit of, you know, something in between the middle management, usually speaking. That is a bit frozen, and where people, you know, don't really dare to take risks, where they see let's say more the risks than the opportunities. How do you deal with that when you engage with your clients?
Yeah, I think the mid management is definitely the place where you have to be. We try to bring them experiences in learning. I think in discovering or reconnecting to your true self, the experience-based learning is very valuable. But you deal with big communities, large groups of people, and it's a big investment if you want to pull them all in, of course. So I think there are like technology is coming in as well in a way to train people where you could go for bigger communities, helping them to reconnect. But in these experience-based programs that we do, that are very effective, but difficult to scale in big organizations, I admit this, we bring the business leaders into different communities. We get them into youth detention centers, or we do a leadership program in a refugee center. And we actually team up the business leaders with youth offenders, or we team them up with refugees. And we give them a task for impact, and they need to deliver at the end of the line. And it's actually in those programs that they are challenged to practice empathy in a different way than they are used to. Or in their organizations, different ways of communication. It's actually a program that shifts the paradigms of people, that kills the limiting beliefs we have, that helps them to build a new language and a new narrative of approaching their leadership. And then you go for skills, you train skills. And I think their online learning, their the blended learning is creating opportunities to go for bigger populations, I think. But you need the inspiration. You need the experience. I think.
And you need to ground it into emotions as well. This is what you said. Just working with the left brain, let's put it that way, is not sufficient. It needs to be grounded into things that you will remember.
Yeah, and the value of experience-based learning is in the reflection after the experience.
Yeah,
and we often forget to reflect.
Yeah, true. Thank you for that. So thank you, Adelaide, for providing the framework. Thank you for the how-tos and the tips, and I think that we can bring Sebastian back on the screen, because now we will be taking some questions from the audience. So feel free to raise your hand, and we'll provide you with a mic. So I see already a number of those. Can you just introduce yourself briefly, and then tell who the question is for? If you know. Apologies, we'll come back to you, I think.
Hi, my name's Jessie from EY, from London. I have a question relating to the study, but would also be interesting to hear from the wider group in terms of your experiences. Around if you've seen a difference between the different ownership structures and the CEO's experiences. So, for example, from private companies or family businesses versus, for example, publicly traded companies. And the reason I ask is my experience is that anecdotally I hear that there is clearly a cultural shift or a cultural difference between intention and action, but there is a wider structural challenge as well where the rubber hits the road. And just interested for any outcomes from the study and those differences and from the wider panel's experiences.
Yes, there's definitely big differences. I might hand this one over to Chris if we've got him on the line. Otherwise, I can respond. But he signed in from Australia at 2 in the morning, and I know he loves this topic.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, a pleasure. Thanks for having me. We certainly saw some differences in ownership structure. We saw that with family-owned businesses, a sense of legacy was important, and there was intergenerational handover of, I guess, purpose, impact, and a history of having a strong relationship with local communities. We also saw that with companies that had private equity, there was some, I guess, acceptance that there may be some more experimentation, potentially more comfortable with a longer term payoff. But a lot of it depended on the relationship between the board and the CEO and the team. But yeah, family-owned businesses, very unique, and private equity, depending on the relationship between the board and the CEO, did seem to have a bit more of that experimental and longer term vision there.
And when they were publicly listed, obviously a lot more complicated, shorter term outcomes, a lot more pressure, for those financial returns in the short term. And for those companies, it was a little bit harder. And you have CEOs who are, only there for a couple of years. They're expecting those big returns, and that's definitely a big barrier, for sure.
Thank you. I think we
hi.
have a... Oh, I'm sorry. I think your
Oh, okay.
yeah, your neighbor, I think, had a raised. Sorry. Can we try to keep it short if we want to
I do it
make
really
justice to
short.
everyone?
I
Thank
also
you.
need to leave for my session, so thank you so much. It's amazing and great, because what we have done in Germany, so I'm a senior researcher on entrepreneurship, migration and innovation, and what we've done in Germany, we had 50 interviews with the middle management and CEOs on leadership. And what we found out, and I don't want, if this reflects, I guess it reflects a little bit, that they are in a liminality stage, which means they are not they don't know where they are at the moment. So what they try, for instance, they try to roll out the leadership to the employees, to take them on board to change something. But what they see is that the employees, they don't want to do it. They just feel like, they don't want to be, so the leaders don't want to be the leaders anymore, but the employees, the same. So that's like a stage in between. Then technology comes in, crisis comes in, and everybody is swimming in a pool. Nobody knows how to go there. So this is what we've been observing, and I just would like to ask you how to do it. And by the way, if we ask them, however, would you like to stop to be a leader? No. They would like to go for leadership still, so it's like, it was a strange one, and I don't know how to put it in words, but maybe you could see it also with your study. So thanks once again.
I think it was more of a comment, no?
Yeah, definitely agree. It's called diffusion of responsibility. No one wants to take it up, and it's definitely something that we saw.
Yeah.
But it's changing, and like you said, liminal stage. So we've gone from sporadic ad hoc initiatives to this kind of wanting to align purpose and impact, but not quite. Intention and action is still quite far away.
I think we have time for a couple of questions more. Yeah. Oh,
Hi.
3.
I'm a social entrepreneur working on youth empowerment and vocational orientation. I have a question for Arno. I'm wondering, how did you approach the company leaders to get their support and funding? And how did you convince them? Because most of the time, convincing on issues like human rights or needy people, it's not easy in the private sector. So I would want to learn your experience. Thanks,
you. Sarah. Yeah, and you should be on stage here as well, actually. You have a lot of stuff to add to the conversation as well, I think. She's doing great work with Mikado, so look it up. But I think what we do is we just follow the needs of the people. Often companies buy in programs with Streetwise, and their target is not to become more sustainable, or it's not, they just deal with and most of our clients right now are busy with talent acquisition and retention. And it's from that angle that we come in. But of course, you can add to this, because becoming more sustainable and more human-centric, actually, you bring in the skills they're going to need to become more transformative companies. But we often just detect where are the problems, and we try to be very client-focused and understand their problems and solve their problems through our models, and meanwhile convince them of our models and push them to do more of this. So in a way, we step in with a hidden agenda in many cases, but with a positive and a well-intention with that hidden agenda.
And we need to take them where they are. This is also what we see constantly. I think there was one question from this gentleman on the front. Oh, okay, you, and then you will have the one.
Sorry. I have a question. I'm an social entrepreneur. I just sold my company this year, and I'm starting a new one. I wanted to find out and learn from you in terms of what you saw as differences between behaviors and attitudes of large CEOs of large organizations, and how you think CEOs of budding CEOs of social entrepreneurs who just raise their capital, what can they learn? Because what I'm finding is that young CEOs who are there to actually really tackle wicked problems, but they didn't have the same experience as the big CEOs, and yet they don't have the same organizational capability and capacity and also funding. So are there any lessons that you can share to the younger CEOs or startup CEOs?
Sébastien, do you want to take it?
I can try. The first thing I would say is to open network, because when we did start the relationship with Ashoka, that's the first time of our life that we did meet some entrepreneurs, social entrepreneur people, as described during my speech. So it means that thanks to that network, we did meet people first. We did meet also companies that started before us. If I take this example of Boehringer Ingelheim, for example, the German company, they started 10 years ago, 10 years before Cursia. So it means that they've got an experience that we don't have. And we are a member of that Changemaker League, that Ashoka built, and that's also an opportunity to meet other company as Cursia is with C position inside their organization. So I would say that after, of course, discussing with Adélaïde or Arnaud and with peers, it makes sense for me to learn the more you can before to start and to avoid some mistakes or issues.
Thank you. We'll take the last question from you.
I'm Eric Felt. I'm an Ashoka Support Network member from Sweden. I've been working in the financial industry most of my life, and we are obsessed with KPIs and targets and measurements and also remuneration. And on the issue of engaging middle managers, what is your view on linking certain KPIs related to sustainability to remuneration so that they're measured on this? Because then what's your view on that? I shouldn't presage anything.
Maybe just one note on KPIs and metrics is a huge barrier, obviously, because when we're talking about CSR sustainability, there's so many different topics, there are different levels of maturity, and there are different levels of, the ability to measure them. I also think with ESG metrics, even though, the financial industry has pushed and has been a driver, there's also a lot of, people are feeling a bit dubious about some of the measurements. There's some low-hanging fruits, maybe in the G area, in the governance. And so, a lot of CEOs were saying, at the same time it's driving us, but also some of these metrics are, still need a lot of work, and we are not there yet. We need time to develop better metrics. We need to get together and work with, our partners and other organizations to find better metrics. So it's definitely, a huge chantier. There's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. Arnaud, if I can just add something.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I fully aligned with Adélaïde's words. And just to illustrate, I think that it's also a message for you, Ashoka, and the change maker, I would say, companies and social entrepreneurs. We need us collectively committed to change and to build all the metrics and the definition of KPIs, as mentioned by Adélaïde. And just as an example, some of are in meeting room, and this with Isabelle, yes, director, she's with you. We are trying to build an EPNL, or what we call environment PNL, but call it CSR PNL, because to make the relationship in between financial criteria and KPI that all the people in the world know with the new one, and to make equivalence and to be sure that the people that understand themselves. And that's really something, and Adélaïde is perfectly right, that we need to work on, because that's missing today in the panorama for building that CSR further step.
Thank you. Do you want to add something?
Yeah,
in 20
just
seconds?
one thing. Next to the matrices, and I'll bring it back to the self-awareness of people. If you speak about values, if you speak about impact stories of the engagement, the reason why people engage in a company, this is where the impact side is. And of course, in there we don't have the tools. So we should train the people to correct themselves when they shift out of their core and when they're like compromising on values. And I think you can do this by raising that self-awareness and training people in that self-reflection. Because if people will do that, they will correct themselves towards those values and towards the bigger stories they write, I think. So you need the matrices as well, but you need to train the right skills as well, I think, in the people.
Yeah, and talking about skills, Sébastien, we did not mention that you decided to really integrate what we call the changemaker skills, so empathy, collaboration, horizontal leadership, etc., into observable skills in your performance reviews at the company. So I think that that's also a way to basically complement, let's say, the competency metrics of a given organization with this set of soft skills that also need to be mastered in order to really, I would say, lead sustainable change. We are reaching the end of this session. I would love to make justice to Chris, who woke up until so late, to ask you maybe, Chris, to share with us, in 2 to 3 minutes, your main takeaways of this session. And also, obviously, from the study, if you want to add what Adelaide said before, and what you just learned. What would you share with the audience today?
Great, thank you, Anu. Listening to the conversation and reflecting on the research, I think there's 2 themes that continue to come through. One was this self-awareness, which has been talked about. And it's notable that 2 of our CEO profiles had strong self-awareness. And so we have legacy builders and the long-term advocates. And both of these CEO profiles had some transformative personal experience. So it had either been from inception, from the beginning, they were values driven, they understood some of their purpose, certainly an awareness, or there had been a crisis or an experience, some reflection in their life, and they too had transformed. So there's certainly the role that awareness plays. Interestingly, for those CEOs with that awareness, some of them appeared to be willing to, if they couldn't transform the company, would try and find the company or the role that they could then use to have the impact that they wanted. Another point adding on that is, with awareness, is where is the influence coming from, and what sort of voices are CEOs hearing and senior leaders? And certainly the organization structure has an impact there. There's younger employees and this sense that we heard about employee activism and decentralization. So internally understanding the voices, all the way through to something we saw, which was like a CEO children effect, having a daughter or son, and the influence that that was having on awareness for the CEOs. The second point, and I think the key point here, is the importance of psychological safety for our CEOs. And this is why I really like the title here, which is of our topic, which is about having an empathy for business leaders. And with what Adelaide spoke about earlier, with a dichotomy of good and evil, moral framing versus the CEOs, which have been institutionalized and trained in business tools, business language. You mentioned the language before. And so to a degree, they're not necessarily equipped or haven't traditionally been equipped to navigate this good versus evil dichotomy, which is very easy to see in the media. And so we did see the defensiveness. We did see some fear here. And it's almost as if there's 2 different conversations at times. And I think that empathy is important to understand, that some of our CEOs, they're not philosophers, they're not ethicists, they're not trained with some of these tools for these extremely complex problems. And by having that empathy, it makes me think of a parallel of polarization in society more broadly. I think we've all seen what's happened with vaccines. We've got political polarization and this sort of simple narratives. And one of the solutions to this has been talked about as a principle of charity, which is about being able to argue and understand an opponent's argument so clearly that it's the best representation of their view. So an empathy with the minds of CEOs and their calculations, and only once we can have a real empathy with those challenges and those struggles and what they're dealing with, are we then truly equipped to enter a conversation, so to speak. And so it makes me wonder if perhaps there's been a mischaracterization of the motivations and attitudes of CEOs. So I think can't stress enough the importance of that empathy and meeting them on their terms there.
Thank you, Chris. I suggest that we keep empathy as the closing word for this session. I hope you had a better sense of what we try to achieve with this study that you have here. Obviously, if you don't have it, there are some examples here. You can also download it for the sake of preserving the environment. Thank you for the prep work. Thank you, and congrats, Maëlys, for this great work. Thank you, Adelaide and Chris, for fantastic research. We hope to continue it and to keep it as a tracker. Thank you, Arnaud, for your great insight. Thank you, Sébastien, for calling from a distance. And see you soon. And have a good rest of the conference. Thank you.
Bye-bye.